So what does it actually mean when I say things like metaphysics and when I make these certain arguments for God's existence? What exactly are metaphysics? Well, metaphysics are essentially realities of life that cannot be proven through pure empiricism and pure sensory reasoning. They are things that go beyond such things. An example of metaphysics would be the laws of logic. A lot of people even claim that mathematics themselves, mathematics actually are metaphysical in that they pre-exist the human mind. And the evidence for that, or the logical evidence to suggest that to be the case, would be people who say, well, is the law of gravity a mathematical equation? Yes, it's always been a mathematical equation. But the law of gravity, underneath the worldview of cosmic science, the law of gravity definitely pre-existed human existence. And if it pre-existed human existence, that means that we couldn't have invented the law of gravity, which essentially means that the mathematics for the law of gravity existed before we wrote it down. But then what was it? Because if we hadn't have written the law of gravity down on paper, then there was no physicalism involved. So where was the law of gravity before humans? Well, it wasn't anywhere in the physical reality, which means it had to have been metaphysical. That is the only other way it could have ever existed, because it can't just, it can't be in between metaphysics and physics. That's nominalism, and nominalism has to do with language, and this is before the humans even existed, is what we're talking about. So nominalism doesn't make any sense for this. So it had to have been metaphysical. And this leads back to the previous video about the transcendental argument for God. People often use the Mandelbrot set or the law of gravity in certain realities, mathematical realities that have pre-existed human endeavor, as a way to prove God's existence. And it is very solid argumentation, though there are counter-arguments to them that also should be considered. This argument has yet to be 100% disproven by any empirical scientist, whether it be quantum people who engage in quantum physics, subatomic matter, mathematical equations, which, by the way, lack an actual empirical base to them. And actually, if you run a lot of those theories through the scientific method, which, by the way, obeys the laws of logic, then it actually doesn't work. That same thing goes with things like evolution. Evolution is a story that, if put through the scientific method, actually can't even be considered a theory, because there are so many leaps and so many jumps in which we make to prove, quote unquote, prove evolution, that it's hard to actually even say it's even empirical. It's funny how empiricists who think that the only way to know whether or not something is true is through analysis from what we see. It's funny how those people also believe in evolution, which is literally assuming a bunch of processes that none of us have ever seen before, whether that be the growth of sexual reproductive organs back when we were bacteria, after the meteors fell on Earth, before Theia hit Earth and became the moon. Like, those are all stories that have no empirical grounding, yet these scientists go ahead and say, oh, that must have happened. Like, there is no evidence for it. There is no evidence that back when Earth was a fireball, there was rocks of lava falling down, and actually in those meteorites there were these grains of salt with water particles in them that made an ocean, and then those oceans created these things that essentially spewed out like soup with bacteria. Like, those are just crazy, absolutely abstract faith claims that people put into the religion of evolution. And I think people need to understand that evolution has so many jumps. The Cambrian explosion, how did it happen? Well, apparently there was 2 ice ages, and in between and during the ice ages, it just happened, just explosion, boom, Cambrian explosion. There's no evidence for the fact that, like, where did it start? There is no evidence, or at least none that I know. If people want to correct me, please give me the evidence in which, and I will grant you evolution and consider your evidence, but I've yet to hear it. Anyways, I'm going away from metaphysics, but metaphysics are essentially realities that are self-evident in that we know they exist. We know the laws of logic exist. We know that mathematics exist. We know epistemology exists, and some people are quite certain that the soul or spirit exists, and the soul and spirit, those two things are metaphysical in their nature. The purgatory, the gateways to heaven. Heaven is both a physical and metaphysical realm that people's souls dwell in underneath the Orthodox Christian paradigm. It is not simply it is not just a place, it is a metaphysical place in which the forces of God's love and Jesus Christ's love move through people's souls, and that is entirely metaphysical. So yeah, metaphysics are things that exist but we can't prove through empiricism. It's quite easy to understand, and if you want to truly understand what metaphysics are, you can read Aristotle or Plato, who both have written large amounts of information about what metaphysics are, as well as lay the foundation for how we can understand the laws of logic. So it's a pretty good read to read people like that. I wouldn't recommend reading Cronus or Hume or any of these determinist philosophers if you're trying to actually understand what metaphysics are, because most of them do not agree with metaphysics. They don't think that it is valuable to any real realm of human endeavor with regards to knowledge and knowing what is. So I wouldn't recommend indulging in those specific philosophers if you want to learn metaphysics, because if you believe in metaphysics, you automatically reject pure physicalism and determinism and materialism instantly. So anyways, that is a explanation of what metaphysics are, at least a little bit, so people understand. I went off some tangents, but that's okay, bro. I can go off a couple tangents, know what I'm saying, homie?